TCC All-Stars is here, bringing back several winners and some very coolio teams that I will be reviewing today. If you liked the video, make sure to like and maybe even subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. But with that, let's get into it. First off, we have the Red Rabbits consisting of Gaming Guy, Codex 13, the Dracobee, and Smarjan. Now, this is actually a rerun of the Certified Championships Cyan Creepers, though didn't actually win that event. We're back anyway to win as a team this time. This team consists of obviously Draco, who is a very outstanding player in TCC, who rarely drops out of top 10. Is overall super strong in most games, although I'd say especially in RSR. Then we have Gaming Guy, who is also a pretty solid player, especially in movement games. However, he can struggle a bit more in PvP. And then we have Codex and Smarjan, who are both pretty solid players. While sometimes they don't place the best, they're still generally very good, especially at games like Parkour Warrior Survivor, in which they excel in. Now, this would make this team a movement team who want to play games like Parkour and RSR as late as possible. Although this team can struggle a lot in terms of PvP, as this team doesn't really have a good record in PvP games. For the most part, over the past few events, they haven't had the best performances, especially in games like Sky Battle. But although Draco is very solid at PvP, so that could lift them up in those games. And they all know each other very well, so comms will be very good, which could definitely help them out in those PvP games and lift them up to perform even better than they look on paper. Next up, we have the Yellow Yaks, consisting of Stripes, Alt for Me, Mirror, and Slime Ball. Now, this team is very odd, as their top frag Alt actually kind of counteracts the rest of them. Alt is actually a very strong player in the event, and especially in terms of PvP games, as she is pretty solid compared to most of the other people in TCC. However, the rest of her team is sort of the opposite. Stripes is definitely known for being way better at more movement-based games like Rocket Sleep Rush, along with Mirror as well. And then Slimeball is a bit more of an all-rounder in terms of good games, although he can shine sometimes, as we saw in TCC Rush and Underdog Championships, where they did surprisingly well in both of those, almost getting top 10 in one of them and getting top 10 in the other. So they can definitely be an underrated player, in my opinion, and could catch people off guard. I do think this team is slightly more movement oriented, especially towards RSR. However, I do think with Alt's leadership, PvP games could be really nothing for them, as a good PvP leader can have them all perform at their best, in my opinion. And it is sort of true for Stripes and Mirror, as in TCC World of Color, they had one good PvP player, which was Applejacks on their team, and they got really good placements in Battle Box that event. So it goes to show that just having a strong leader can definitely help this team do significantly better in PvP games. Although I do think Parkour might be a bit more rough for them. Next up, we have the Lime Llamas with Applejacks, Fruit Cereal, Mini, and Wokes. This team is a semi-nod back to the TCC Underdog Championship Cyan Coyotes, only with a few members replaced. They are led by Applejacks, one of the best players in TCC, especially in more of the PvP games like Sky Battle and Battlebox, where they excel in. Then we also have Wokes and Fruit Zero, who are playing in a canon event for the first time, as they only play in Underdog Championships, but both did fairly well, especially Wokes, who gapped third in Div by around 500 points. and almost beat first in Div, who is someone who has done very well before. So Wokes is a very strong player. While maybe not as strong as Applejacks, they are still very good. And especially at more PvP games like Sky Battle. And similar could be said for Fruit Cereal. While not as strong in PvP, they're actually a bit more all-rounded, but still pretty solid at PvP as well. And then we have Mini, another like all-rounded player who isn't like the best. However, he can pull his weight when it needs to be done. Now, this team is obviously a very Sky Battle heavy team, and I think they could easily dominate that game. However, on the other spectrum, they're not as good at movement games, especially Tug Toss and RSR, which could be a big problem for them if it ends up getting played late, which RSR usually does. So as long as they're able to keep the movement games a bit more early, then they could probably easily dominate in the late game with all those PvP games. Next up, we have the Cyan Coyotes with Taser, Mixed Exclamation, Dylan WMC, and Terror. Now, this is sort of a wild card team, as in total, this team probably has the least amount of events played. However, that doesn't mean you should underestimate them. They have Taser, who got first Indiv in their first event, and was the first one to get 8th repeat in Parkour Warrior, making them just very strong at like every game in general, but especially at Parkour. Then we have Terror, who hasn't done the best. However, he's actually really underrated in my opinion, especially in PvP games. He can definitely hold his own very well. Then we have Matrix, who is sort of the wild card as this team, as he's gone 22nd in his first event, but then the other event he played, he got 13th, making him just sort of like all-rounded in every game. I mean, he could do really well or really bad, depending on the circumstance. And then we have Dylan, who is also pretty solid, but a bit more lenient toward movement games in general. This team is interesting, as it doesn't seem like they have any super strong game. All their weaknesses and strengths kind of cancel out to make it to where they're just all around decent at everything, which could be a blessing or a curse. This could lead to them doing really well, as with no real weaknesses, they could do solid in any game, but this also means they have no strengths in any game, which could also lead to them doing very bad. I do think their best game might be Parkour Warrior, as they're all generally not that bad at movement. But it is very hard to tell with the limited amount of events they've played and the fact that they counteract their weaknesses very well with their strengths. So I definitely think this team could go either way. They could either dominate really hard or just get owned. Next up, we have the Aqua Axolotls with Aries the Martin, Dr. Orange Fox, Skate, and TG. Now, this team is very strong, in my opinion. They're led by Skate, one of the best players in TCC, as he has never dropped out of top 3 in any event, which is absolutely incredible from him. He's also just very strong at most games in general, especially more PvP oriented ones. Then we have Orange Fox, who's a bit more all-rounded. However, he tends to excel more in PvP games like Sky Battle and Battle Box, especially if he has TNT. And then we have TG, who's a bit more all-rounded, but more towards movement games in general. And then we also have Aries, who is also quite like well-rounded. And while he doesn't do the best, he can definitely lock in when he needs to. I do think this team is a bit more leaning towards Sky Battle as their best game, as they have 2 pretty solid PvPers and then one really amazing one. However, RSR is going to be a weak game for them. As well, they aren't the worst at it. They could definitely be a lot better. So playing it late would definitely hurt them. And movement games in general hurt them quite a bit, although not as much as RSR would hurt them. So they definitely want to get Sky Battle late and RSR early. Next up, we have the Blue Bats featuring Cyan Coyotes, Minecrafting, Onid, and yours truly. Yes, I play in this event, but I will not be biased in this team review and will be fair to every team, including my own. Anyways, we've got Caden here, who's a very solid all-around player and also obviously the owner of the event. He's very strong at RSR especially, but he's also pretty solid at all the other games as well, though leaning more towards movement games. Then there's Minecrafting, who's all around decent, but very good at Battle Box and Sky Battle, making him a bit more PvP orientated. Then we have Onid, who has been underperforming, at least her past two events. However, she is definitely very good at movement in general, making her pretty consistent. And then there's me, of course. And I lean a bit towards movement more, especially RSR and parkour. But I'm not that bad at PvP as well. I would say our best game is definitely RSR because we have three pretty solid RSR players. Though, on the contrast, we're not that good at to get to your side, unfortunately. Because none of us are like super crazy with our block placements and general movement, besides maybe Onid. But yeah, I definitely think my team has a good shot of making finale, especially if we get one of the movement games out later. And we aren't too bad at PvP, though obviously it'd be better if it was earlier than too late for us. This is also the third time me, Caden, and Minecrafting have also teamed together in TCC. Next up, we have the Purple Pandas with Axolotls, a Purple Penguin, Icy Flames, and Just Kills. This event sees the return of Icy Flames since TCC Charity Challenge. However, in that event, he did very well. He got third overall, and is overall just a very strong player, especially more towards PvP games. Then we have Kills, who is another very strong player, in my opinion, and excels in most games, although maybe slightly more towards movement. However, he's still very strong in PvP. And then we have a Purple Penguin, who is sort of a wild card to this team, as recently he has not been doing as hot. However, he can do really well. He leans more towards movement games like RSR, but he's no joke at PvP as well. And then lastly, we have Axolotls, who might not be as strong as the rest of this team. However, he can still do very well, especially in like PvP games where he's got like great game sense, in my opinion. I definitely think this team leans more towards PvP games, as while their movement isn't that bad, I definitely don't think it's as good as their PvP. I do think their performance could potentially ride on a Purple Penguin doing well, as this team could easily dominate. However, if a Purple Penguin underperforms, they might not do as well. However, I do think even with that, they have a very solid shot of making finale, especially with two very strong players at their side. Last but not least is the Pink Parrots with Alex TK, Certified, Koshid, and Spared. This sees the long-time return of Certified, one of the best players, if not the best player in TCC. He is very strong at every game just in general, and is a very outstanding player. Next up, we have Alex, who is a very strong player who gets consistently top 10 in most of the events. and is just a decent all-round player who isn't too strong in any game, but is certainly isn't bad at any. Then we have Koshid, who definitely can be an underrated player and lock in when you need some too. And then we have Spared, who's definitely a bit more lenient towards PvP. However, he can definitely do strong in most games if under the right conditions. I definitely think this team might want to get Tug Toss or get out really early because most of them aren't the best at it. But then, other than that, I just feel like this team is just solid at every other game. They're not super strong. However, they are still decently good at every game to where they don't really have that many bad games. And they could easily dominate. And I think the vibes on this team as well will definitely help them out and just keep pushing them to do very well. And that is it for the TCC All Stars teams review. Remember, this is all in good fun, and I just do this because I really enjoy watching events, and obviously, in this case, playing events. As far as when my next video will be, don't know. However, I do hope, and it might be Soul Steel themed, which is Nakaru's newest server on Bedrock. But otherwise, yeah. Hope you enjoyed, and bye-bye!